Right, so welcome to this conversation. So today I'm joined by Lenny and Carlos, who you will definitely know from Voidcast. So, actually, instead of me introducing Voidcast, it's actually maybe if you guys introduce it, because you'll obviously know it way better than me, even though I have listened to every episode so far and I'm looking forward to the next one. But yeah, Lenny, do you want to go first with just give a brief introduction as to who you are, how you found antinatalism, and then maybe just what is Voidcast?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for having us. I've been on this channel before where I introduced myself in the interview on antinatalism in Germany, but I can give you a brief introduction again. So I'm Lenny, I'm 27, I live in the north of Germany, and I'm currently wrapping up my master's degree in classical philology, that is ancient literature. And I've been active with a few more or less antinatalism related projects, but mostly in the background and during the past couple of months, mainly transcribing, translating, editing some obscure books, writing summaries and essays, collecting material, putting together bibliographies, organizing conferences and local meetups and stuff like that. I also helped you out with a couple of video essays with the relevant literature. And right now I'm doing this wonderful podcast together with my friend Carlos. So, but for most people, I assume I'm just a random guy with a funny accent, a couple of niche interests, and unusually strong opinions on these.
Yeah, so I'm Carlos. I organize nothing except the podcast, but I'm okay with it. So I live in South Hertfordshire, which would be kind of just outside London. For most people, it's basically London. Where I live is kind of a continuous urban sprawl anyway. In the past, I did organize some London antinatalist meetups, which through indirectly, not intentionally, Lawrence himself has picked up quite successfully, which is great because it means I don't have to organize them. It's not that I have anything against organizing. I'm just a very busy person at the moment. So I have a day job, and I have quite a lot of other hobbies. Some of them bleed into the Voidcast podcast itself. Which is a reason that I'm probably not more involved in the organization. Although I do a vegan activism, but not antinatalist activism, which to me hasn't yet taken a shape maybe that I'm totally comfortable in participating, or that I feel it's at its most efficient, or at least not as efficient as its vegan counterparts. As for the podcast itself, it's impossible not to talk about the other podcast I had, which was the Voidwave Podcast. And that podcast was basically me talking to a German friend of mine about antinatalism, and then that ended. And now I have another podcast where I talk to a German friend about antinatalism. So, things just never end. They just kind of cycle for me, it seems.
Yeah, and so I was gonna bring up Voidwave, but you've already covered it. So actually, instead, what I'm gonna do is actually just ask a question off the back of what you said, because I found it interesting. You were saying that antinatalist activism hasn't taken a form that you're either comfortable with doing or you don't see as effective. What sort of activism would you be interested in taking part in? And I'm not going to hold you to this. This is just purely out of interest.
It feels like I'm being recruited somehow. Yeah, I mean, it's understandable. I think, for example, what Population Matters do, or in theory they do, although they focus heavily on the developing world, they don't seem to have quite a lot of activities where I live. Although I think those things are generally useful because they don't talk about antinatalism itself. They just are very kind of practical. So I would say trying to preserve women's control over their own bodies, which generally kind of tends towards much fewer pregnancies than you would have when women don't have control over their own bodies, and kind of trying to keep as much as possible access to birth control and family planning, etc. Family planning just sounded terrible coming out of my mouth, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah,
I mean, those things
planning,
are kind of
family planning, or planning not to have a family, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Zero family planning.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I 100% get you. I think there are a lot of people out there who they want to make the world a better place using antinatalism, but not explicitly using antinatalism, but doing things that are aligned with antinatalism that you've highlighted, like increasing access to forms of birth control, increasing education for everyone, but specifically women, because that seems to have more of a correlation with decreasing birth rates. So I 100% get you. I think a lot of to be honest, I think a lot of the progress that antinatalists could make will be those forms of activism, because I think it avoids all of the pushback of just plain antinatalism. But and also there are big organizations, structures already set up to do those forms of activism that we can get involved with, rather than reinventing the wheel. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to kind of take over this question, but I just find that, for example, for street activism, the arguments for antinatalism are just too complex to explain in the same amount of time that you can explain, for example, why consuming the flesh of animals is bad.
Yeah,
I think the arguments are a bit more are just difficult to explain in that kind of scenario. Although, I mean, I have nothing against doing antinatalist street activism, and we know that there's been an organization organizing such things in the past 2 years.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a form for that. I would just rather do other things.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think we do need to have a diversity in the approaches we have, because different things are going to appeal to different people and make change in different ways. And also it's going to play to different antinatalist strengths. Some people may be better at one thing and some better at other things. Anyway, so
one thing I want to add is maybe you can convince someone that bringing a child into this world is not the wisest thing to do. Maybe you could do that. Maybe you could be successful in doing that. But to convince someone that it would have been better for them not to have been born, not to have been brought into existence, I mean, I think this is almost impossible, because this is, at the end of the day, it's a question of deeply held intuitions. It's a question of values, and you can't just, in a 5-minute conversation with a stranger, instill your pessimistic values into someone else.
Yeah. No, 100%. I get you. Well, talking of antinatalist activism, you two may not see Voidcast as a form of activism, but I definitely see it as a major contribution to the antinatalist community, because I think helping to just in general building things that are focused around antinatalism, whatever they are, whether they're focused on external things like educating people about antinatalism, or more internal things, just providing a form of entertainment, or like a interesting conversation for people to think about. I think they're all like valid forms of a contribution. But one thing that I wanted to ask Lenny is, like, how do you see Voidcast contributing to the antinatalist community? Do you intend it just to be like a form of entertainment, or have you got like further aspirations as to how it can contribute to the antinatalist community?
I mean, it's certainly nice if people are entertained by our ramblings, but I think first and foremost, we're doing this simply because we're passionate about it, because it's nice to have a project and a somewhat regular schedule, and like to get together and discuss pieces of media and art and books and movies and whatever. I think it's it's a nice thing to do, and if we can share it with other people who might be interested in hearing our perspective, hearing our comments and whatever we have to say, I think that's even better. So sure, entertainment is maybe a part of this, but I think what's also important is, like, we might be able to offer some sort of company, for lack of a better word, because I know our position, like as vegan antinatalists who lean to the political left and are not religious, I think we're such a tiny minority in the world, and it's very, very easy if you like also hold these beliefs to feel very isolated in the world. And I think, who was it? Claire Mann, I think, the psychologist, coined the term dystopia for a vegan who experiences this sort of existential crisis and despair because they don't feel understood by the rest of the world, who like happily keeps, continuing abusing animals and so forth. And this might be even increased if you're also an antinatalist and your values really don't align with the majorities. And so I think for people like this and people like us, might be simply nice to know there are other people out there who share these beliefs, who also share these passions and views, and just listen to these two guys with similar values but very different personalities, like having casual conversations about the things that they like. I think might be a nice change.
No, I agree. I do think it has an element of helping to as you said, there's that like entertainment part of it, and then there's also the part of it of like, I don't know what the best way of putting it is. Maybe, I don't know, is comfort the an accurate term? Because it is quite comforting to be able to listen to people who share a view that you have. It's sometimes when I talk about things like this, it sounds like I'm promoting echo chambers, but it's really not that, because there's a difference between being in an echo chamber and engaging with content that you agree with, but you find comfort in listening to, or it helps you explore the topic more. And I think that is a valuable contribution. Maybe it even contributes to community building, because it's like when you release, for example, when you released the your most recent episode on Anyara, the Swedish film, is the word signposted people to it. Like I sent it to a few people and had some discussions with people related to Anyara and your episode. So it definitely contributes to a sense of community as well, because it gives something. It gives the community something to talk about. I don't I don't know if this is the best analogy, but it's like when Carlos will have heard of this, but Lenny, I don't know if you would have heard of EastEnders.
I don't think so.
So EastEnders is like the most famous, we call them soap operas in the UK. So it's basically like an ongoing TV show that happens, I think it's multiple times a week, and you follow the characters throughout their lives, and there's all these blah, 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 whatever. And it's like something that people watch and then have discussions about afterwards, right? Now, with EastEnders, they probably aren't the most intellectual discussions, so that's why it's a bad analogy. But I think Voidcast and things similar to it can provide a similar sort of function, in that they provide things for people to bond around and talk about. But anyway, sorry, Carlos, did you have anything to add about what you see it contributing to the community?
Yeah. Although I kind of just I'll just pick up on a few things that Lenny said. So I mean, obviously, I grew up in a very different time to the time we live in now, which is a scary thing to say, because I'm only kind of halfway through my time in this world. I was trying to look for a less optimistic word than time, but to my duty in this world, I've kind of I've served half my term in this world, but so there's still quite more changes I'm going to see, but I know it's hard to fathom this, but I pretty much only got the internet well into my 20s, which meant I was already kind of a fully formed pessimist by the time I got the internet. So I spent many years where I literally didn't know a single living soul who shared the same thoughts that I shared. And whenever I tried to talk to people about these things, they would look to me as if I was an alien. And you have to bear in mind there weren't that many. Without the internet, it was very hard to kind of get access to any of this. So basically, it was just me in the library reading about Buddhism and what's the word, moksha, and Schopenhauer and all that stuff, right? And then I would have literally nobody to talk to. And I always think there's going to be other people out there who probably have had these thoughts, have no way to relate these thoughts to any written documents or to any other living people or dead people with the same thoughts. And we thought maybe through popular media we could kind of get to them and talk to them and kind of reach out to them. So there's the community aspect of it, and maybe kind of draw them from that into other things as well. Although the intention of the podcast was not just to do popular media, it's just we've been through a super busy periods, and it's really hard to do kind of book reviews when you have so much else going on, because we really want to go in that. But we will do them before the end of the year, that's for sure. It's just like a bunch of coincidences. As for the podcast itself, I have a rule for it, which I think Lenny shares, which is it needs to be fun for us to do as well. It needs to be, it can't be a chore for us, because I think that's going to come across on the podcast and the tone and what we say. So we try to make it, we set ourselves a date, we do our research, or watch a movie and then kind of read as much as we can about it, or read the book and then analyze it, take quotes, etc. And then we show up on that date, mostly unscripted, almost completely unscripted, and then just have a chat about it. And we hope this, when you mentioned comfort and coziness, I think that comes from that as well, because it's literally just two friends who set a date every month to talk about a certain topic. So it's perhaps not the most professional approach. We don't have like a producer and writers to kind of give us a list of topics to talk, and editors to kind of go over and pick the best bits. So it's definitely a very kind of organic experience for us, and hopefully for our listeners too. And I just realized something. This is the first time I'm showing my face on anything related to antinatalism online. Okay, that's fine. Well, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, obviously you have the right to veto at any point up until it's published.
No. So. It's completely fine. And we were talking about feeling like an alien, and I obviously here in the UK, veganism is very widely spread, and you talk to people about veganism, and they kind of, mostly they confuse it with a plant-based diet, but let's roll with it, and then you can explain the other bits. I guess it's a beginning. I go into the countryside a lot as part of my vegan activism every weekend, except this one for a change. I go into the countryside to do my vegan activism, so to speak, and frequently when we stop, we go into a country pub, and these pubs in the middle of the nowhere have like vegan menus, right? Here in the UK, it's a real. These are the lands of hunters and animal farmers, and they will have like a vegan menu, a fully fledged vegan menu on the most remote country pub you can think of. But I had the experience of being in Switzerland for the first week of a new job at the beginning of the month. And everybody in my team, which was like a very much like a continental Europe variety of French people, Greeks, Swiss, Germans, I was literally the first vegan person they had ever met in their lives.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And these were like people my age, so they had lived a long time, and they had never met a vegan in their lives, and I felt really strange in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Like they really didn't understand why and how, and how somebody could come to such thoughts. And then I had a thought about antinatalism and how antinatalists who go out into the world, into their communities, and share their thoughts about human reproduction, specifically in this case, how they must feel, how alienated they must feel. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I often forget that I live in such a bubble as well. Not just like the UK itself is kind of a vegan bubble because it is pretty normalized here. Like, I also did a hike recently along the south coast of the UK, and very rural areas. We came across we stayed in bed and breakfasts, which, for anyone that isn't familiar with what that is, it's basically just like some people have rooms in their house where they say you can stay in them for a couple of nights and they give you breakfast and stuff. But like, every bed and breakfast was completely fine with doing a vegan option. And one of the bed and breakfasts we stayed in, we realized when we got there that they had paintings all around their house of hunting, because they were hunters, and we didn't realize until we got there, but they still provided a vegan option for breakfast. So it's like, it is pretty normalized in the UK now. Like, obviously it's not as normalized as it could be, but it's pretty normalized. So yeah, I definitely recognize like what you're saying there, with the fact that it's easy to be in a bubble, and then when you step outside the bubble, you realize like how different the environment you're in is into other places. And it's the same.
I was in a major European city, and the group of maybe 15, 20 people I was interacting with for that week, I was literally the first vegan they had ever met. Which felt incredibly strange. And of course you can imagine how hungry I went that week, but that's another question.
Yeah, I think you probably ate all of the hummus in Switzerland.
No, there was no hummus, so because that's very exotic. That was too exotic for the location.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of bread and water. Yeah.
Anyway, so you actually kind of already mentioned it, so I'll go on to this question about like popular media, popular culture, sort of. So 2 of the episodes that you've done, so the first ever episode you did was about a video or a post that a vegan activist did, but the 2 since then were about Pop Squad, which was an episode on Love, Death and Robots, and then Anyara, which is a Swedish film, which, I mean, Pop Squad is definitely popular culture because Love, Death and Robots was very, very popular. Anyara, I don't know if you can call it popular media, but it's a film anyway. Like, what are both of your favorite examples of antinatalism in popular media, or just media generally? Obviously ignoring Pop Squad and Anyara because you already did episodes on those, but like, just your personal favorites. It doesn't have to be a particularly famous one, but just like the one that you've come across that you've enjoyed learning about or consuming the most. Lenny, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was actually going to say Anyara. Because yeah, it was a suggestion from Carlos, and I think this movie, or rather this story, which is based on an epic poem by Swedish poet Harry Martinsson, really like hit the nail on the head when it comes to the meaningless of human existence and this part of the human predicament, which also David Benatar wrote about in his book, The Human Predicament. And I think it does a really good job at kind of presenting this thought experiment and showing the implications of this cosmic insignificance that we have, and which is not that easy to, I think, to present on the screen or in any kind of media representation. But I think that this movie does an excellent job of that. And even though it's not explicitly antinatalist. Every now and then we like have characters in certain stories, so sometimes even in dramas or in TV shows, make antinatalist statements. But this is then over the course of the episode or whatever, like significantly weakened or debunked, and you end up with an overall optimistic message. But this is not the case for Anyara. Anyara is really deeply pessimistic, and this is something that it's kind of like unmitigated pessimism, which is not what you're used to seeing in the cinema. And this is what I really like about this story. And especially I also highly recommend reading the book, because Harry Martinson does, I mean, his mastery of the Swedish language, and there are also English and German translations, also helps with creating this world in your head, basically. And it's just a fascinating story. I highly recommend you check it out.
Yeah, with so I watched Anyara before your episode came out, so that I'd already seen it when I listened to your guys' episode on it. And it was funny because I watched it with my dad, and my dad he's not antinatalist. I've had debates with him about it before, but we kind of don't talk about it anymore because it's like we've just agreed to disagree. But you know, he's just like a general guy, you know.
General guy.
not antinatalist, you know, the same. Yeah, exactly. A bloke. Like, he has the same sort of optimism that's in the background culture and all that sort of stuff. And we watched Anyara together, and I didn't tell him what it was, you know, like I just said, it's a sci-fi film with a twist, and we watched it. And when it finished and the credits went, I sort of looked at him, and he was still looking at the screen, and he just went, "Fucking hell, that was depressing."
Yeah, the first time I watched it, the ending really left me speechless. Very, very powerful moment.
Yeah, but it was funny to me because I watched it, and I was kind of primed because I knew that, you know, like I knew because you guys were covering it and I'd heard about it before. I was like, I kind of knew the general vibe of it, so I was kind of primed, and I just found it super interesting. And I was thinking about, oh well, what message does this send? But it was just funny to be next to someone who he was just watching, and he was just like, that's just fucking depressing. Clearly not getting any other sort of big messages from it or anything. But yeah, anyway, Carlos, what's your sort of like favorite piece of antinatalism in like popular?
I would have to say the films of Hungarian filmmaker Béla Tarr, and the books in which they're based on, or kind of loosely that kind of world, which is from an author called, I'm going to butcher this name, by the way, sorry, any Hungarian viewers, László Krasnoharkai. That's my best I can do. And they Béla Tarr's movies have always been kind of based on books by Krasnoharkai, or written by him, and they're relentlessly pessimistic. They're more pessimistic than, say, for example, Anyara would be, because Anyara has some bright moments. I'm not doing any spoilers, by the way. Anyara has some bright moments, and then it kind of just overall has a very pessimistic tone and ending, etc. But it does have some bright moments and some hope. Whereas, for example, a movie like Béla Tarr's The Turin Horse is a relentlessly pessimistic movie. If you had to draw a line in terms of moods, it would start very low and would go down to zero from very, very low. There are no bright moments or any kind of hope going into that. And it's a movie that only very old people could have written and directed, by the way. And I think it's related to that as well. There's no kind of young exuberance or positivity or energy that things could change. I would say that. But then I'm a continental European guy, so I like my heavy stuff. I always did. Or as my sister would say, you were born old. So there you go.
So I've actually never heard of this this guy. So is his whole sort of body of like his whole filmography, is it all like that?
I would say most of it. There's some early movies which are, you just come out of film school, you're trying to imitate your heroes as a young creator of art, and you kind of tend to put in a few cliches, but then it just kind of goes down. I mean, if you watch something like the Werkmeister Harmonies, which I would say is Bellatar's peak, that's based on the book The Melancholy of Resistance, which is also a very good book. That movie is an incredibly pessimistic movie, in this case about people and so society and interaction of people in society, which is what society is. And then his career just kind of, the mood just sours until The Turin Horse, which is his final movie, which he said, "I'm done with filmmaking," which is the best way when you do a very bleak movie that ends in a zero and you announce it as your final movie. It's just the perfect conclusion to a career. Dedicated. Yes, I would say so. I mean, there's kind of a very strong undercurrent of pessimistic films and books in kind of 20th century and kind of early 21st century Europe. Yeah, okay. I should say I'm an art house film grad, by the way. So
yeah. So
that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check some of those out because I've never heard of them before. So I'll find the links, so I'll get them from you and I'll put them in the description so other people can find them. But yeah, apart from, so obviously you said before, like popular media or culture is not the only thing that you want to cover on Voidcast, and you've said that there's also other things that you want to cover, maybe some books. Obviously only reveal as much as you want to, but what other sort of general areas or things do you want to cover on Voidcast? Lenny, do you want to go first for this one?
Yeah, sure. So we have a list of topics to cover, which is quite long by now. And Carlos added a number of movies, and I added a number of YouTube videos, for example, that we were specifically asked to comment on or react to. There are also, as you mentioned, a number of books, so both fiction but also longer academic books, which I think are worth discussing and relevant to us and maybe also to our audience. And then, just a couple of more abstract topics like the future of antinatalism or antinatalism and transhumanism, and like antinatalism and birth rates, things like this that might be interesting or might become interesting. And so Voidwave ended in 2020, and ever since we've seen a massive increase of antinatalist content. Like almost every day, someone uploads something related to antinatalism and definitely to veganism. And it might be worth providing these content creators with some constructive and good faith feedback as well, and criticism. For example, on Voidwave, Carlos and Jonathan did a review of this antinatalism argument guide, a 3-part review. And we also thought about maybe we could do something similar with your antinatalist handbook. That is, go through the arguments and add our comments and our perspectives to it, and provide some discussion of it.
Yeah, just for the Lenny and I actually talked about this off the recording, but just for the benefit of people watching and also Carlos, I would be really excited for you guys to do something like that. Like, obviously, for you guys, it's just an idea at this stage. By no means am I pressuring you, to do it like straight away or at all. But if you did decide to do some sort of mini series on responding to the handbook, I would be really interested to hear your guys' thoughts and feedback and stuff like that. So as I said to Lenny, you have my blessings on that one. and I'm looking forward to it if it ever happens.
You could then do a live stream reacting to us, reacting to your content.
Exactly. Yeah. And we'd get a little antinatalist inception going.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you have anything else to add, Lenny, or?
Added to the list of topics that we want to
no, just general thoughts on like other things you wanted to touch on, or shall I hand over to Carlos?
I mean, we briefly discussed this before, but we also, I put together a somewhat comprehensive bibliography of academic papers on antinatalism, mostly philosophical papers, but there have been a few psychological surveys and studies on antinatalism and the antinatalism community as well. And we're also considering doing an episode on these studies as well, because they are very relevant to the community and to us and to our audience, and might be worth like adding some comments on this.
Actually, one idea that just came to my mind is I think Lenny is aware of this, but Carlos, I'm sure you're aware of this as well. But there was a time when there was an antinatalist magazine running, and I think it had 3 issues or 4
issues.
4, yeah. If you guys wanted to, that could be an interesting, reviewing each edition of that magazine, if there's enough stuff in there to respond to and talk about. But that was just something that popped to mind. Obviously, if you think that idea is dog shit, then leave it at the door and post it.
It's an interesting idea. I might have to get in touch with Andreas again.
Yeah.
And so I only have the first and the third issue, and I don't think the other 2 are still available, but if you have them, please let us know. And
cool. I'll let you know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Like, just for people watching, I'm not sure if they're publicly available anymore.
The first
but
one
anyway. Oh, okay, cool.
Edited by the late Jiwoon Huang, but the first one is available for free download.
Cool. But we can discuss that later, Lenny. Carlos, did you have anything to add on like things that you'd be interested in exploring in later episodes?
Obviously there are the books and some meaty ones, and the sad part is I've read pretty much everything that we want to talk about, but I want to reread them. And of course, when you're reading something, when you're reading a 300-page book for yourself, it's one thing. When you're reading 300-page book to digest it for other people, it's more like a 900-page book, right? Because you need to kind of go over things and take notes and try to create a language that you can explain it to other people rather than instinctively understanding what the book is saying. Which, of course, if you've read quite a lot in the antinatalist space, you'll automatically kind of just get, some terminology just get. Whereas when you're trying to digest it for other people, it takes quite a bit more effort. So ideally, I would like that, because I don't want us to be pigeonholed as the movie guys, right? But in Voidwave, we did something which we did kind of a roundup of news episodes as well. I think we did at least one of those, where we just looked at a bunch of news that had happened in the last month related somehow to antinatalism, and kind of just put them together, trying to find a through line, trying to find a tendency. Just recently, I don't even go out and look for this stuff. And this is me browsing news feeds without using my account, using something that doesn't have a tracker, so they don't know what kind of stuff I look for. But I've seen an incredible amount of articles about youth depression, at least in the West, which are the kind of news I have access to. So for example, just looking at that and then kind of pulling at those threads and seeing what comes out, and then doing an episode on that, for example.
Yeah. Youth depression is like such a big I only fear it's going to get worse, because you've got like the rise of eco anxiety with climate change, but you've also just got people are just especially young people are just chronically online now, and we're just not evolved to have the majority of our social interactions online. It just doesn't seem to be good for our psychology. I mean, I even see this with I say young people I know. I mean, I'm only 26, but like I see this with like younger people I know. It's like dating is now online with dating apps. Like social interactions are now online with social media. Like the content you're consuming is all online. Like you don't really, like back in the day, if you wanted to go and see a talk or something, you actually had to go and see a talk. But now like everything's on YouTube, and like I think I heard somewhere that the majority of content that people consume now was produced in the last 24 hours, which is really interesting. So it's like the likelihood that the content being consumed in the last 24 hours is actually quality content conveying wisdom is probably not that high, because if you're consuming content from way back in the day, it's probably got more wisdom and value in it, given the fact that it's survived this long. Now, obviously, that isn't a hard and fast rule. There's a lot of bullshit that has survived for thousands of years. But it seems more likely that something would be of value than, the hundreds or thousands of hours of things that have been produced in the last 24 hours, most of which will probably be cat memes. But so I get you on the youth angle. It's it's a worrying situation.
I mean, it's just a particular topic that I thought about, but I won't focus so much on the fact of the youth depression, but like all the factors that go into that and what kind of comes out of it and what it relates to. Because we do live in abundant societies, where everybody in theory can have shelter and food and doesn't have to worry about, well, for the most part, about imminent war or be in a war themselves. Anyway, back in the day, Lawrence.
So actually kind of changing lanes now, because both of you at different points, or maybe at the same point, have mentioned some like discontents you have with the antinatalist community. What are the issues that you guys see with the antinatalist community, and do you have any ideas for how we can maybe improve those issues? Lenny, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so when you look at definitions of antinatalism on the internet, you sometimes find definitions that include antinatalism is a philosophy, but it is also becoming a social movement. And as such, I mean, antinatalism having become a bit of an identity or online identity of its own is a very double-edged sword, and it comes with a lot of baggage and issues that need to be addressed somehow. And if you take a look at self-described antinatalist communities on the internet, you will find that most of them are in a pretty bad state. And I think much of it boils down to the fact that, it's just very convenient to use a philosophy or this philosophical term that you've just discovered on Reddit or maybe on YouTube as an ideological excuse of sorts to vent your hate and your frustrations in life and legitimize your own personal perhaps mental issues, instead of at least trying to work on yourself. And I feel that many antinatalists are not actually interested in philosophy and or in being consistent with their ethics. So this is definitely a problem. Then we have a lot of issues related to hate and attitudes toward violence, especially violence against women. We also see there's a certain overlap between the antinatalist online community and the incel community, which is very problematic and which is an issue that needs to be addressed. And violence even against children too, which I don't know how surprising it is, given that there's also an overlap between the antinatalist community and just like blatant baby hate. I mean, when people on Reddit see, oh, cool, I have an anti-work community and I have an anti-cars community and anti-this and anti-that. And now, oh, lo and behold, there's an anti-baby community. And I even get some like moral kudos for being an antinatalist. So excellent. And yeah, I think these are issues. Then I noticed that a lot of people have this like selective blindness, if you can call it that. So, I mean, antinatalists often describe themselves as being like particularly compassionate people, even though the few surveys that we've seen so far seem to suggest the opposite. I'm not sure, the evidence is not conclusive yet, but nevertheless, people often like are very, very sensitive to certain types of suffering, but then turn a blind eye to other types of suffering. For example, a lot of people are completely blind or indifferent to the suffering of animals, for example, or others are almost indifferent to the suffering of children. And you know, there's something weird about this as well. So I know there have been attempts or plans in the past to kind of transform or reform the antinatalism community for better or worse. But I think what we should focus on is, first of all, educate the uneducated, then civilize the unhinged, and get the people who really need some help, the help that they need, and not tell them, well, actually, you're engaging in totally valid and objectively true or whatever philosophy. And yeah, and definitely find a way to deal with the hateful, because this is regardless of whether you're an antinatalist or whatever your beliefs on existence and procreation and whatever are, I think this is a huge issue.
I had a few things that I wanted to touch on from the things you were saying. So the first thing you were saying, it made something click in my mind about when people have personal issues that they attach to antinatalism. And I've thought about this before, but when you were saying it just then, something kind of clicked in my mind. And I was thinking that, like, obviously there are people who have severe issues in their lives which are not of their making. Like maybe they've just had a really shit hand dealt to them when they were born. But there are many people that are in situations in their lives that are not what they want, and it is something that they either brought upon themselves, or they could have made decisions that would have led to something better. And we all have that. Like I have that, you guys all have that, other people, like we all have decisions that we prefer we made differently. And maybe finding antinatalism is, people come across it and they've got some sort of personal issue and they find antinatalism, and it gives them a package of a way to externalize the blame for those issues. It's like, I have personal issues and it's not my fault. It's someone else's fault for creating me. That is where I can lie the blame. Now, I'm not saying that this is not going to be something that everyone does, obviously, but it does seem like antinatalism can be misused as a way of externalizing the blame for, the situation that you're in. So I agree with you. There's definitely an issue of people overloading antinatalism with their personal issues. Like, I think it's completely reasonable to identify issues in your life and recognize that those inform your view that it would be better never to have come into existence in an intellectual way. But some people push it a bit too far and use antinatalism almost as a scapegoat. So I get what you mean there. And the other thing that I was going to comment on is when you were talking about antinatalists sometimes have like selective compassion. what, like, when it comes to compassion and empathy, I guess there is like a distinction there. But I was reading the other day about some like initial research that has been done into antinatalists and empathy, and it was saying that there's no correlation between. So there's two types of empathy. Apparently, there's affective, and I forget what the term is for the other one. Yeah, cognitive. So the study was saying that they found a slight negative but not massive relationship between antinatalist views and affective empathy, which for anyone listening that doesn't know the distinction, so affective empathy is when, like, you see someone in distress or someone who, you know, is feeling bad in some way, and you kind of mirror that in your own emotions. You get some anxiety, or you also feel sad with them. That's affective empathy. And cognitive empathy is just the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and see the situation from their point of view, but not necessarily your emotions getting caught up in it. And the study was talking about how there is a slight negative relationship that they found, but this wasn't like extensive research, between antinatalist views and affective empathy, but there was no relationship with cognitive empathy. Which, I mean, I don't know particularly what to take by that. They said that the relationship they did find was pretty weak anyway. So it may not be like it was a significant relationship statistically, but in terms of whether it has actual sort of implications, they kind of said it wasn't that strong a relationship. So that kind of came to mind when you were talking about that as well. But one thing you were also saying is like helping people who have these issues. And I agree with you. I think there is a massive need for mental health assistance in antinatalist circles, but it's just so hard because, one, antinatalists are spread all across the globe, so not everyone's going to be in a position where they have access to adequate mental health support, right? Like they may in some specific countries that are, you know, more economically developed and maybe have more resources to put towards this stuff. But also, even if you have access to those services, like antinatalists may very well be suffering from poor mental health because it interlinks with their antinatalism, because they're more aware of more suffering going on in the world, or in a different way than the average person. So it's like we need mental health support, but we also need tailored mental health support. And it's just like there aren't really people out there that are in that niche. So it's really hard to know what to do about that issue. I don't like, Lenny, do you have any sort of ideas on how that is an issue we can maybe address in some way?
Well, I think something that makes this really difficult is the fact that like a pessimistic outlook on life or on the world or on existence is often like pathologized in itself. That is, oh, you hold these views, this means you are like by default depressed or this or that. And there's a clear distinction, I think, between what one might call reasonable or pragmatic or rational pessimism, because I do think that antinatalism is indeed a rational position to hold. So there's nothing like inherently wrong with holding antinatal and like presenting antinatalist arguments and so forth. But it would be nice to have like people specializing in mental health issues who also share these values. And this I think this would be a good start, like so that they don't mistakenly identify the antinatalist or pessimist views themselves as the problem or the symptom or whatever, but that you can focus on your other issues that may or may not intertwine with your like ideological beliefs, but that you can like work productively on without like denying the pessimist part of your identity. And this is, by the way, also something that even the first modern antinatalist, Koenig, also writes about. Like, this kind of the optimistic ideology that often underlies psychiatric treatment, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly hard to find a therapist that can at least be aware of these kinds of concepts or ways of seeing the world and not immediately think you're depressed because of them. I've held these beliefs for 30 years. I've been very happy in the meantime, and I've been very sad in the meantime. I mean, I don't find I mean, for some people they do, but at least for me, it was, to me it says, it affects me being sad or not as much as the sky being blue, which to me is just a fact. And I find that with the therapists I've engaged with before, I'm currently not in therapy, but I was 2.5 years ago, where I saw somebody like every 2 weeks for about 6 months. It was a chore just to kind of bring them a little into my perception of the world. Perception of the world that's not kind of automatically just kind of painted over in pink with the the standard optimistic bias. So it was really a chore just to kind of try to get them to understand that these things are just, the reason I was depressed, and I knew what I was depressed, it was actually very factual things happening in my life. It was not kind of the underpinnings of my worldview. Because currently I'm going through a very happy patch in my life, and I hold exactly the same beliefs I held back then. But it was really hard to find a therapist that would even engage with these thoughts. I mean, ultimately, I think, this is not obviously my layman's opinion, but a lot of the therapy industry, health industry, is related to getting people back out there doing the stuff they've always done, which is having a job, being able to hold down the job, provide for their family, or being stable enough for their family and friends, and kind of not self-harming, and if they can achieve those kind of very mechanical things in a person, then their job is done. I remember when I engaged with sorry, not to get too much into this topic, but I'll try to be brief. When I was engaging with mental health assistants from the NHS here in the UK, the National Health Service, they had like a form, and the form questions about my mood, etc. And people, your viewers might have seen this before, and the questions were basically catered towards two very functional aspects. One, was I likely to kill myself soon? And the second question was I able to do my job? And so it was a very kind of mechanical, instrumental approach to mental health, where you just try, okay, if this person kills themselves, we failed. If this person has to go on sick leave, we failed. So if we can get this person, it doesn't matter how miserable they are, if you can get this person into their job at 9 a.m. on a Monday, and then they go home and don't kill themselves, then job done as mental health professionals.
It's like they're trying to make you not depressed, but they're trying to make you a functional depressive.
Yes, pretty much. And the like the KPIs, to use something from my world, the kind of key performance indicators, the objectives, the two goals, the two check boxes are: has this person killed themselves or attempted to? No. Has this person been able to hold down a job and be a productive member of society? Yes. They can be as miserable as we want. So thinking of the mental health industry, at least the ones I've come across, even on private healthcare, on these terms, it really does make you wonder if there's any room in there for antinatalism or pessimistic philosophy, right?
Yeah, the closest person I've seen to someone who could be like an antinatalist sort of therapist is I'm not sure if either of you have seen any of his videos, but there's a guy called Daniel Mackler. Either of you aware of him?
Unfortunately not, no.
So I don't believe he is antinatalist, but he's very close. He has made a lot of videos. A lot of his videos have been very well viewed. It's just often him just talking to camera, and he uses quite an old setup. Like, it's not a good quality camera and stuff. But I believe he was. I don't know like what the technical differences are between like a therapist and a psychotherapist and a psycho and all of these sort of terms. But he worked with people in what sounds from his description like therapy, and he's also made a lot of videos critical of procreation. But I've never seen him use the term antinatalist or anything like that. I am actually planning to reach out to him at some point to try and have a conversation with him. But I'm not sure if he's actually practicing anymore as well. Like, I think he might have left the profession, but he seems to me like the closest person to an antinatalist therapist. But I would be surprised if he's even actually had any antinatalist clients before. But apart from him, I can't think of anyone, to be honest, who would be. The only other person I can think of is Claire Mann. She's a vegan like therapist. She does therapy sessions with vegans specifically tailored to veganism. I've spoken to her before. She's not antinatalist, but she is aware of what it is. But because she's not antinatalist herself, I don't know if she would be the best suited, but she's aware of it. But yeah, she's the only other person I can think of, but she's more tailored towards veganism. But there are some parallels there.
There's such a thing as existentialist therapy, for example.
She actually mentioned that to me. Yeah.
It's a bit like vegetarianism and veganism. You know what I mean?
Is it? Oh, okay. Yeah. So it doesn't quite get there.
Yeah. I mean, if you're familiar with the kind of mid 20th century existentialist philosophy, you'll see where I'm coming from. Yeah, where they recognize, for example, the meaninglessness of existence and human existence in particular, but then they kind of draw the wrong conclusions from it. But yeah.
Yeah. Do either of you have any other issues you see in the antinatalist community you wanted to bring up, or?
I mean, I think the issue is when you talk about the antinatalist community, we're kind of almost by default reverting to an online communities, right? I mean, obviously you've got the meetups in London going now, and there's probably other meetups going elsewhere, and of course there's the street activism of Stop Having Kids, where people physically are together, but mostly it's online communities. So there's a very strong skew towards younger people, and so because there's a skew towards younger people, there's a skew towards certain types of ideas, certain types of energy, certain types of experience of life. I as an old man in the and in terms of the online antilatist community, I'm kind of in the older bracket in terms of age. I mean, a lot of kind of very angry or sad antinatalist people that show up in the community, young people. To be honest, a lot of their problems are incredibly trivial and definitely a product of their age. They're not deep philosophical, universal problems. They're literally engaging with the things happening to them at that particular moment, which is fine. I mean, I have plenty of empathy towards them, and I can definitely put myself. I have both the affective and the cognitive empathy towards them. Having been somebody who, at their age, was probably going through exactly the same things, but those things are not necessarily antinatalism in its kind of universal perception, which is what it is, right? When we make statements about it's better not have been born, we're talking about, oh, I have my exams to get into university within a month to be born. You know, it's better not to have been born because I will have exams to get into university. Like a very specific thing, young person's problem thing. So the online community has a lot of that discourse happening. But of course, this is not nearly as serious as the things that Lenny mentioned, with kind of misogyny and violent ideation.
And one more thing to add, there's always this a certain danger because it's a very thin line between an unconventional but ultimately solid philosophical position and your own personal issues developing into some sort of belief system that you then become very convinced of, and you find maybe a community centered around a belief that is very, very close to your own intuitions, but also to your own biases. And I think this is just that's not very healthy, and that's not what philosophy is supposed to be. Philosophy is not supposed to be this convenient. I mean, just finding something that perfectly aligns with your intuitions, so that you can say, okay, now I don't have to do anything anymore. Now I'm doing perfect by the standards of this particular philosophy, no matter how fringe a belief it is. So yeah, I think that we should be very careful, especially when it comes to these fringe beliefs, and yeah, I mean, as long as we focus on what we want to do with our lives and, you know, decisions that we make ourselves, I think it's not that, doesn't become that much of a problem. But once people start discussing plans to I don't know, relieve the whole world from suffering, then it becomes very, very difficult. When people don't see past their own negative biases anymore, because positive biases, as David Benter has shown, are very, very prominent and very apparent too. But there's also such a thing as negative biases, and so I think philosophy essentially urges us to constantly question our own biases and to do better.
Yeah, and that should be the purpose of philosophy. Should be this conscious examination of our thoughts and positions and views, and what we hold to be true. And we never lived in a time where it's so easy for somebody with fringe beliefs to broadcast them, find others who share the same, and then buddy up somewhere where they will never be challenged on them.
And this is exactly what we see happening on Reddit and Discord and obscure little Facebook groups. Yeah. So I think that philosophers like David Beneta and Karim Akama have done excellent work, and a very, very important job too in defending antinatalism and presenting it as a philosophical position that is, whether you agree with it or not, at least worth taking seriously and having serious discussions about it, and providing interesting answers to important philosophical questions. So this is an achievement that should not be treated lightly, if that makes sense. So yeah, we have a lot of important contributions from these people, and we don't have to rely on fringe beliefs that someone somewhere on the internet says.
Yeah, and I think so. Just to quickly go back to what Carlos was saying about the antinatalist community being very online. I agree. Like, I'm a big advocate for people meeting up online, meeting up in person. I think it just you'll form deeper connections with people. In-person experiences are just better than online ones. They just have whole new realms open up, and a lot more opportunity can come up. You know, conversation seems to be a lot more. Things come up in random conversation when you're in person a lot more than they do. I've found when you're online. So yeah, I agree. We need a lot more. And actually, one of the things that I valued the most about the in-person vegan community is that it is so diverse in terms of age group, because I find great value when I go to a vegan event, having friends who are like, you know, younger than me, although, you know, they can't really get much younger than me, or like people who are like much older than me, you know, talking to people who are 70 years old or 60 or 50 or 40 or whatever. I just find that there's a great value in talking to people of different ages. So I 100% agree with Carlos there. And yeah, Lenny, on your point, I agree. I think one thing, I think we as antinatalists need to be more careful than others. Everyone needs to be careful about this, but we need to be more careful about others than utopian thinking. And the other thing you said that I think is, you were talking about, like, you know, I think if we want to improve the culture of the antinatalist community, particularly online, like, we've each got to do it. It's not like one person is going to build something or make some change and it's just going to change the culture so that it's healthy, right? It's something we all actively build the culture from our individual interactions. And so we each have to be aware of how we're contributing to the culture. And like, are we all going to be perfect all the time? Like, no. Like, I probably have put out stuff before on my YouTube channel or done other stuff which hasn't been the most healthiest contribution to the community. But in general, if we have this sort of, you know, sense about us of, I want to, you know, cultivate a healthy sort of dynamic in the antinatalist community, then, you know, it will improve if we all have that mindset. But yeah, thanks for both, you know, giving your input on like issues in the antinatalist community. So before we wrap up, where can people obviously I will put all the relevant links in the description, but where can people find Voidcast? And if you're open to people following you in particular spaces as individuals, where can they do that as well? Carlos, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, so our Linktree is definitely the place to catch up on everything Voidwave. That's definitely where we keep all our links, and we actually update it whenever we have new episodes. So I think the Linktree is the number one place.
Yeah, you can find it at linktr.ee/veganvoidcast.
Yeah, I'll put it in the description so people can just click it.
So yeah, we are on Twitter as well, but you can just get that from the Linktree.
From the Linktree, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. And yeah,
I was just going to say I do have a Twitter I use, but you can just I think that's it's not relevant to this discussion, although I do post a lot of antinatalist stuff, but it's not really an antinatalist Twitter because my life is more diverse than just being an antinatalist.
Which is very important. I mean, don't make your entire personality about antinatalism. This is really something worth like mentioning. Antinatalism is a very, very limited position and only provides like answers to a very limited set of questions. Like, is it ethical to bring new sentient beings into existence? This is Benetow's approach. Or is it ethical to bring moral agents into existence, which is more like the Cabreran approach? Is it rational to regret having come into existence? Should mankind exist? This is Karima Kammer's main question and stuff like that. But the vast majority of questions that philosophy poses, that your own life poses, are simply left unanswered by antinatalism. So don't be just an antinatalist. I mean, Carlos and I, we're doing a lot of other things in our lives too. I'm a musician. I play in a band. I have a lot of other niche interests and hobbies and whatever. So don't get like stuck in it.
Yeah. And Lenny, where can people find you if they want to follow you personally, or is there anywhere?
I don't think people will want to find me. No, so I'm kind of trying to keep a low profile. People can reach out to me via the Voidcast contacts. Cool. Can write an email to veganvoidcast@protonmail.com, and chances are that I've been reasonably active in online antinatalist spaces, so chances are we have already interacted before on either on Reddit or on Discord somewhere.
I think the easiest way to interact with us on a kind of more personal, individual level would be Discord.
Yeah,
cool.
Because we do hang out there.
And we also have a small Discord channel on the Vegan Antinatalist Club server where you can also find us and, leave feedback, make suggestions, which we'll happily take into consideration for future episodes.
Okay, nice. Yeah, and if there's anyone who is both vegan and antinatalist and wants to join that server, then they can get in contact with any of us, and we can let you know how to do that.
It's also on our link tree. So
it's on the link tree.
It's on the link. Oh, okay, cool. Then just go to the link tree. Cool. Well, thanks so much both for coming on. It's actually been like a lot of wider spanning conversation than I thought it was going to be, but I've enjoyed it a lot. So I'm looking forward to the next episode, which actually I think will probably come out before this. So there will be a fourth episode. If it's coming out on the 1st as usual, there will be a fourth episode before this comes out. But thanks so much, Lenny and Carlos, for coming on and for putting all the work into Voidcast that you do. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks
very
so much,
Lawrence.
Lawrence.